Thank you so much. Welcome, dear audience, to our noontime webinar on this beautiful Tuesday, May 19th, 2020. I think this year's FEI Digital Week is a little bit different, I guess, especially because we have loads of people tuned in from almost every corner of the planet. They have the capability, they have the time to do so, and unlike most of the other Zoom or Team or whatever web sessions you joined in the past couple of weeks, this time you can just lean back in the comfort of your home and enjoy the topic. No camera, no video, no unmuting, all is good. Well, today we will be talking about anti-fragile innovation. Or in different terms, how to rebel against the innovation legacy. Yes, I admit it's a bit inspired by Nassim Taleb's concept of anti-fragile or anti-fragility, but we extended it to the realm of innovation. So, what are we going to cover today? We're going to cover three topics. First of all, why we need anti-fragile innovation. Second topic is going to be, what is the most important attribute of anti-fragile innovation? And thirdly and lastly, how can all of us, you included, start today to become anti-fragile in the realm of innovation? Dear participants, my name is Karel John Golla. I'm a business romantic, an entrepreneur, and the CEO of Indeed Innovation, a global innovation services firm on a mission to create a better future for all life on Earth. And as we just heard, with me today is my dear colleague Eunji. She's strategic designer, lead designer at Indeed. And hi, Eunji.
Hi, Karel. Hi, everyone. My name is Eunji Park. At Indeed, I focus on a research-driven process and design strategy to produce early concepts and implement them into reality. I am very excited to share a new perspective on front-end innovation with Karel today.
Yes, so let's get started. And actually, thank you, Josh, for your talk before us, which is a great entry point into the topic because we see a lot of change happening right now. There is no question about that. I think especially we need to point out at some facts and figures. First of all, globally, the top G20 countries, so the most powerful 20 countries, economically powerful countries in the world, are increasing ever their public debt. And it's going to go up to 95% of GDP by 2024. This is not good. It is fraying our fundamentals, especially it is risking our economic stability and our social cohesion. And this is a problem that is going to get even worse, especially because we have other topics that we have to look into. For example, that 2018, we had $165 billion in damage caused by natural disaster. And let me be very clear here. This is recurrent. This is not just a one-time ticket or fine we get. This is something that we're going to probably see every year, and it's going to increase every year. And as if this would not be enough, we also have a social divide. Still today, in the 21st century, it is disappointing to see that it is still luck, whether you're born in a country with a good health system or not, and that decides whether you're going to live to, let's say, 73 rather than 40 years. Because the gap, the discrepancy between the longest or best developed country with the best healthcare system and the worst one means 33 years of age difference. And that's brutal, I would say. Last but not least, just to sum it up, we could almost say, is that the World Economic Forum sees that the top 5 long-term global risks for our society and for our economy are all climate-related issues, okay? There are things like climate action failure, extreme weather conditions for sure, but the typical human-made environmental disasters. Now, what I'd like to point out is hardly legible on the slide, I know, but on the upper left quadrant, in the middle about, you see a red diamond-shaped square. Well, that's infectious disease. That means they foresee that infectious diseases are less likely to happen with less impact on our economy than the other 5 climate-related issues. What does that lead us to? Well, I, for myself, could say we are at a tipping point. But if I can quote UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he says we are at the point of no return. Quite drastic. Why? Where is that coming from? Well, there again, I would say it comes from our innovation legacy, because we have done innovation for the sake of innovation, right? It's all about growth-oriented, which is great because, you know, it usually comes with economic gains. And we were focusing a lot of novelty-driven, right? Because it meant, hey, if it's new, it didn't matter if we've done it 10 times before quite similarly, it just had to be new. It is all about horizontal scalability, and which I think is very critical in these days too, winner takes it all mentality. But we know, right? I mean, the virus doesn't stop on borders. It doesn't stop on Olympic gold medalist. It will not stop anywhere. And the same is going to happen with any climate change. So I think we are in a time where innovation has, or also definitely needs, a new purpose. We need to recode innovation. We need to look into impact-oriented innovation for greater good, of course, with ecological gains. And I would also say that looking for mutually beneficial systems is much more important than anything else, because only together we can scale this ship to a safe shore, and not by everyone swimming individually. And that counts for the future more than probably it counts today. And yes, you could say, Karel, that's quite romantic what you're just telling. Nobody else, especially not big, large corporations, is going to look into that. Well, just look at what Microsoft announced a couple of weeks ago, right? We all heard about it. They made a statement, a bold statement, I would say, that by 2030, Microsoft wants to become carbon negative. This is a huge undertaking, but they went beyond. They said that by 2050, they also want to recapture basically all the CO2 emission that they have done since the beginning of Microsoft, of all the products that they have produced, but also of all the people that use their products during this time. Wow. I mean, come on, this is a moonshot beyond everything we've seen before. And yes, they acknowledge we have no clue how we're going to do that. But this is the new purpose. Okay, innovation for this goal. They don't know how they're going to do that now, but they are on a mission. Now, let me put it then in this point or phrase. Anti-fragile innovation is a paradigm shift to today's innovation approach. It's aiming at planetary level sustenance beyond the typical immediate business growth and limitless expansion.
And therefore, what we need is a behavior change. We need to change our behavior towards the one that combats the emerging crisis, just like the situation we're in right now, and towards the behavior that enables long-term survival. In this context, behavior science is the perfect new baseline and a starting point for anti-fragile innovation, because behavioral science combines disciplines such as psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral economics. It serves a framework for systemic analysis of complex topics such as public health, education, and not to mention sustainability. And by interpreting the root causes of human nature, behavioral science brings a comprehensive view of people's actions and choices that are both rational and irrational. So we see incredible value in incorporating this behavioral approach in the innovation process. And here are some advantages we want to highlight. First of all, behavior science provides a solid ground for developing insights into complex system-level problems. So through this behavioral lens, we understand the multiple reasons why things happen the way they do. And it also serves on an ongoing database for exploring plausible interventions. And having behavioral insights means we can develop an innovation that drives the necessary change in our individual and collective behaviors. And lastly, behavioral approach uses evidence-based criteria to implement the interventions more effectively. This means we can anticipate which solutions are likely to suffer from behavioral patterns, such as low adoption or misperceptions of choices. So as a result, we can potentially estimate the long-term impact of innovation. Now then, let's talk about what constitutes behavior and what influences behavior change. I'd like to introduce to you a model called Behavior Change Wheel. It's called BCW in the field of behavioral science. You see here is the first ring. BCW consists of 3 interacting layers. And this model is important to note that is because it's specifically developed for behavior change interventions. So let's look into the core ring here. So this first layer is the sources of behavior. And here you can see behavior is considered as the result of 3 conditions: capability, motivation, and opportunity. Capability is the individual's physical and psychological ability to engage in an activity. This includes having the necessary knowledge and skills. Motivation is defined as all those cognitive processes that stimulate behavior. This includes habits, emotional responding, and analytical decision-making. And finally, in contrast to these 2 conditions that are actually intrinsic to the individual, opportunity is all the external factors that make the behavior possible. So for example, this could be a supportive culture in an organization or environmental resource that encourages one to behave in a certain way. So these components help identify the nature of the behavior you want to influence or reshape. Now the second layer is intervention functions. These 9 components aim to make the behavior change happen. For instance, you see in incentivization, you might be familiar with this. This is about creating an expectation of reward. On the other hand, something called coercion, it's about creating an expectation of punishment or cost. Also, there is a thing called modeling. That's a little bit different than education, which is about providing an aspirational or relatable example. And finally, I want to mention the enablement, which is about increasing means or reducing barriers. So essentially, these 9 components together acts as a critical connector between the sources of behavior, which we just talked about in the previous slide, and then the policy categories, which we'll be seeing in the next slide. So the final layer is policy categories. This should be pretty self-explanatory. This is a collection of actions to be implemented, either at individual level or at a community level. And this is critical in terms of answering the question of what programs, what approaches, systems need to be in place to achieve a specific behavior. So to summarize, the strength of this behavior change framework is that it emphasizes behavior as an interaction between a person and their circumstances, as we can see in the links between these three layers. And ultimately, using this framework, we as business leaders, policymakers, innovators, researchers, and designers can figure out the mechanisms that drive a purposeful innovation for social change. And that brings me to an excellent example that demonstrates how a behavior can be designed. So Allianz, one of Europe's leading insurance companies, recently introduced a program that motivates young people to change their driving to be more safe and conscious. And based on its app and the data analytics, Allianz driving system, it actually tracks their driving behaviors and incentivizes people when their driving behavior improves. So simply put, the better you drive, the more you can save on your insurance premiums. And here you can clearly see the behavior change framework in action, how these three interacting layers that we saw just now, the sources of behavior, the interventions, and the policy categories can make a big impact in people's driving as well as the environment. And the other great example relevant to our discussion here is Beyond Meat. You may know this company, which has been really popular lately. This LA-based plant-based meat producer is making the meatless burger a mainstream trend. What they're doing is they tap into the meat-eating population with a socially and emotionally engaging approach of less meat consumption and better care for the planet. Simple message. But pay attention to the intervention design they are applying here. It's the positive nudging and continuous education that is slowly changing people's perception of meat alternatives, therefore their eating habit. So as a result, Beyond Meat is making a meaningful change towards the sustainable diet direction.
Well, great examples, Eunji, thank you so much. Now that we heard the why and the what, it's time for how do we actually start changing. And I have 4 topics that we can talk about. And the first one is that we need to rethink competition. Yesterday's enemies are today's friends. There's a nice expression, a new one called frenemies, right? So build partnership and alliances for competitive collaborations and very important, collective gains. Here we are again, not the winner takes it all, but actually all together we can be winner. Now, what and how does this actually work? Well, an example is Ørsted, a formerly Danish black energy company that turned absolutely green and profitable in just a couple of years. You have to imagine a company like that was beaten in the classic gas and oil business because in their home turf of Denmark and Scandinavia, there were so many other oil and gas companies, it was harsh. So they decided to go 100% renewable. And instead of competing with others, they looked for allies, sharing the same vision for a sustainable planet, for a sustainable future. So they literally became part of a movement. And although they're all competing for energy, you could say, but since they were united in the movement with others, they were able to grow, to find their place. And they did quite well because today they are the largest offshore wind company in the world. And yes, it's not necessarily about size, but of course also about profitability, and their global expansion, for example, into the US and elsewhere, Great Britain and so forth, was only possible through special partnerships and collaborations. By themselves, they would not have managed, even with a lot of money. So I think a great example to show how we can rethink competition. Second topic is we need to invest in the process. we all know, we love short-term results and successes, but we have to be careful avoiding judging on those short-term performances. They can lead usually to suboptimal decisions or also outcomes because we go rather for something smaller that we can put into our pocket or bank rather than the big picture. So here we have another example that is highlighting what that can actually mean to invest in the process. It's Etsy. Etsy is the first e-commerce company to offset its entire shipping emissions. And what I find is interesting that there was a day that they realized that their largest, or they actually have a large carbon footprint, right? And they realized that it came from emissions from the shipping of the goods between their sellers and the buyers. That it was something out of their control because they were not DHL or FedEx or whatever. So to offset the emissions, they first estimate the emission of each shipping between the two constituents, and then they invest that part into projects to reduce emissions elsewhere. Now, yes, you could say maybe, well, that's a cheap trick, but hey, come on, if you're in a business like that, that's already a first great start because the projects they invest into are not the easy one. Furthermore, they look into every aspect of their daily doing and their platform. For example, to nudge their users to buy more from local sellers. That makes sense because then the emission from the transportation, from the shipment is much less. Furthermore, going carbon neutral needs a process by itself and is not something you can outsource. So they looked into having in their headquarters and offices using solar panels. They support wind parks together actually with Apple. So they build real systems for that. So they really switch from immediate to long-term, but it needs a strategy, it needs a process. Thirdly, operate in ecosystems. I like that a lot because I consider ecosystems as a beautiful metaphor as reefs, right? Coral reefs, and whenever you go diving or so, you see all those different types of animals somehow collaborating together. And this is the same that we need here. And an example for how you can build or elevate an ecosystem even in a constrained area is happening in Vietnam, because Ho Chi Minh is trying to become the first Asian zero plastic waste city. They do that because, or they did it by designing a very special modular social business approach, and that is threefold. So first of all, they increased the waste collection by redefining what is actually waste. Now, people usually do that the other way. They say like, well, actually, we don't have waste because, I don't consider it waste. Well, they did it the other way. They said like, well, we need to increase that part, what actually is waste. And then secondly, they increased the amount of waste being reused for new purposes. Basically, that means they increased the value of the waste, which is quite smart, right? First, you increase the volume, and then you increase the price of it. Why would you do that? Well, because thirdly, they empowered by that the waste picker in the country, in the city, to do more business. And this allowed the emergence of a social business based on the needs of local communities, as well as the gaps in the waste value chain. Quite smart, I think, because in the end, it elevated and expanded an existing system to an ecosystem to add value to the triple bottom line that is people, planet, and profit. Now, fourth, we started with the example of Microsoft, and I think that works quite well here because go bold is the last one. If we think we need new model of innovation for social change, planetary change, for so much change, and that demands rebels. Rebels who can challenge the status quo and set the new normal. So let me summarize what we've just heard, right? First of all, I think you probably can agree with me that we are at a tipping point where innovation needs a new purpose. And second, I would say it is time to innovate for behavioral change, because we need to change our behavior. And thirdly, you know, let's start to rethink competition. Let's invest in long-term processes. Let's operate in beautiful ecosystems all together for a joint mission and vision, and go bold, because only if we go for the really, really big thing, we're going to achieve more than what we have today. So let me conclude with anti-fragile innovation. For us, it is a call to action on changing behaviors of individual, business, and community to build a collective mindset for a global scale impact and long-term planetary sustenance. I'd like to thank you so much for your patience, for your interest and attention, and Eunji and myself are right now available for some questions and comments. So feel free to ping us on the chat function. Thank you.